The cameras were already snapping when I stepped onto the stage, the air thick with the heat of lights and the buzz of expectation. 9 relentless months of negotiations had led to this moment, the $650 million NAVCOM contract. I had flown coast to coast, eaten in sterile cafeterias, and spent endless nights combing through clauses that could torpedo a deal if a single comma fell out of place. For once, I thought I could breathe. Recognition was supposed to feel like this. Victor Hale, our CEO, stood at the podium, his silver hair catching the light like polished steel. "Today," he announced, "Eastbridge Defense secures a historic contract thanks to the vision and leadership of Avery Morgan." Applause thundered across the room. Reporters scribbled notes. Flashes blinded me. I waited for my name to follow, for acknowledgement of the years I'd poured into understanding every nuance of military procurement, but it never came. Instead, Avery walked onto the stage, her crisp navy suit immaculate, her smile flawless. She stood where I should have been, shaking hands with brass and investors, accepting applause for work she barely understood. I forced myself to clap, the sound hollow in my ears. My jaw ached from holding back the fury. 20 years of service, first in uniform, then in contracts reduced to silence while my protégé basked in credit she had not earned. When the press conference ended, I caught Victor backstage. "You could have mentioned my name," I said, voice low, steady. He didn't even pause. "Contracts are about optics. Camila, not sweat. Avery looks the part. That's what our investors want to see." I swallowed hard, his words burning like acid. Sweat didn't close that deal, discipline did. Sacrifice did. 20 years of knowing how procurement officers think did. But to him, my history, my expertise, even my integrity were invisible. Avery's laughter drifted from down the hall as she spoke to reporters, her heels clicking like a victory march. My fists tightened at my sides. In that instant, I understood that the company I had bled for no longer saw me as an asset. The press had crowned their star, and Victor had already set the next act in motion. The morning after the press conference, I walked into the executive boardroom expecting damage control. Perhaps Victor would at least acknowledge my contribution behind closed doors, away from cameras and flashing bulbs. Instead, silence filled the room. The directors sat stiffly around the polished oak table, their faces unreadable, eyes flicking between me and Victor. He didn't stand. He didn't offer a word of thanks. He simply lifted his hand, flicking his wrist as if brushing away dust, and sent a cream-colored envelope sliding across the table. The sound it made soft, final echoed louder than any speech. "Effective immediately," Victor said, his tone clipped and detached. "You're reassigned?" I stared at the envelope, my name typed neatly across the front. Inside, the letter stripped away 2 decades of my life. Senior Vice President no more. From this day forward, I would serve as executive assistant, authority gone, salary gutted, my office, my team, my voice all reassigned with a few strokes of ink. Across from me, Avery shifted in her chair, the corners of her mouth twitching upward. Victor's words continued. Formal and cold. "We believe this transition will better align with the company's vision." Vision. That was the word he used while he handed my chair to someone who had shadowed me for 3 years. I forced my breathing steady, the habits of my Navy training locking me into composure. My mind, however, was already moving tactically, running scenarios, weighing possibilities. Betrayal on this scale wasn't impulsive. It was strategy. My eyes fell to the bottom of the letter, and the date stopped me cold. Signed 3 days earlier. Before the contract was even finalized, they had decided to erase me before I delivered the biggest win of their decade. I folded the paper carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked it under my arm as if it were any other memo. My face betrayed nothing, but inside, I knew this wasn't the end of the battle. This was the opening move of a larger war. I left the boardroom with the envelope pressed against my side, already calculating my next step. The drive back to Arlington blurred into a long stretch of brake lights and half-formed calculations. I repeated the numbers until they became a kind of chant. 12,000 for Raphael's therapy each month, 7,000 per semester for Isabella's tuition, 3,000 for the mortgage. Against that, my new salary, $2,400, looked like a cruel joke. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the math had drilled a hole through my chest. I sat for a minute with the engine off, gripping the steering wheel, trying to summon the strength to walk inside without showing what I carried. The kitchen greeted me with the quiet weight of responsibility. Bills were spread across the counter, stacked by due date in Raphael's careful order. He was sitting nearby, working through his therapy exercises. His left hand trembled as he lifted a weighted ball, sweat shining on his forehead, but he refused to quit. That was Raphael, stubborn, proud, still fighting even as his body betrayed him. Isabella bounded in from the hallway, full of the kind of hope only 18 can hold. She held a brochure from a university she'd been dreaming of. They're hosting a campus weekend. Mama, can we go? I just want to see it. Her eyes sparkled with the same determination I'd once carried into the Navy. I forced a smile, swallowing the lump in my throat. Of course, Isa. Everything's fine. We'll make it work. She hugged me, already talking about dorms and courses, and I let her words wash over me like music I couldn't afford to hear. Behind her, Raphael caught my gaze. He knew me too well, even in his weakened state, but he didn't ask. He just kept rolling that ball, jaw set, as if the two of us could will this family through sheer force. Later, when they were asleep, I spread the bills across the counter again. I added and re-added the numbers, as if repetition could change the outcome. The ink didn't lie, and neither did the deadlines. By midnight, the kitchen light still burned, and I was staring at a future collapsing faster than I could hold it together. The next morning, I walked through Eastbridge's gleaming glass doors as if routine could still anchor me. Habit carried me to the executive floor, but the first thing I saw was absence, the brass nameplate that had read Camila Duarte. Senior Vice President was gone, leaving only a faint rectangle of adhesive residue on the wall. Inside, my office was stripped bare, personal files, framed photos. Even the small Navy coin I kept on my desk vanished. My computer login blinked, red account not recognized. Years of correspondence, contract drafts, and relationships erased with a keystroke. Through the boardroom glass across the hall, I spotted Avery. She stood tall in front of a projection screen, my slide deck glowing behind her. Only the byline had changed. Where it once read, Lead Negotiator Camila Duarte, now appeared Director of Strategic Partnerships Avery Morgan. My photo had been cropped out, her headshot slipped in neatly. The directors leaned forward, nodding as though she were unveiling something brilliant. I watched her recite the words I had crafted, the strategy I had honed through late nights and years of experience. My stomach turned, not from anger alone, but from the certainty that this had never been about recognition. It had always been about replacement. By afternoon, I was hauling a box of belongings into a cubicle 2 floors down. As I shifted papers, a folder slipped free, scattering memos onto the carpet. One page caught my eye. The header bore Eastbridge's insignia, but the line beneath froze me. Strategic Objective Remove CD. My initials. My erasure. Written like a military order. The date was even worse 4 months earlier. Long before the Navcom deal was finalized, I held the paper until my hand trembled. This wasn't fallout from a decision made yesterday. It was a campaign planned in silence while I was securing the contract they now paraded as theirs. The betrayal was deeper than I'd imagined, and I couldn't shake the question pressing harder than the paper in my grip. What else had they already set in motion against me that evening? The house was quiet except for the steady hum of Raphael's therapy machine in the living room. I sat at the kitchen table, bills spread like a battlefield before me, when my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. Normally, I would have ignored it. This time, something made me answer. Ms. Duarte. This is Julian Cortez, contract attorney. I've been reviewing the Navcom deal Eastbridge just announced. His tone was precise, professional, but urgent. I need to ask, did you draft Clause 81C? My mind raced back through the pages I had lived with for months. Yes, I said slowly. That was mine. Why, then you need to know something, he replied. That clause is ironclad. If the designated military liaison is reassigned, Navcom has the right to void the entire contract and demand full restitution. $6.2 billion. The words landed like a detonation. I pushed the bills aside and grabbed a pen, scribbling as he spoke. Julian continued, It's not ambiguous. Courts wouldn't even debate it, and Navcom requested your name specifically. They wanted continuity, your military background, your oversight. If they learn you've been removed, Eastbridge is exposed. I leaned back, the weight of it pressing into my chest. I remembered the day I wrote that clause. Navcom's procurement officer pulling me aside, saying, We've been burned before. We need your name. Duarte, not just the company's. At the time, it felt like routine protection. Now, it was a buried landmine under Victor's empire. Do they know yet? I asked. Not formally, Julian said, but they will, and when they do, Eastbridge will have no ground to stand on. When the call ended, I stared at my notes, the ink blurring as my hand shook. For days I had felt erased, powerless, discarded, but this clause, my clause, was leverage. I closed the folder of unpaid bills and slid it aside. For the first time since Victor handed me that envelope, I wasn't staring at defeat. I was staring at the spark that could bring down everything they thought they had stolen. The house was dark when I opened my laptop, the glow of the screen lighting the kitchen like a war room. I typed slowly, carefully, stripping every ounce of emotion from my words. For your awareness, Eastbridge has reassigned operational oversight away from me. Please review Clause 81C of the executed agreement regarding your rights, should designated liaison oversight be altered. I remain available for questions. I read it 3 times, then once more, making sure there was no trace of bitterness, no accusation, just fact delivered like a scalpel. My finger hovered, and then I clicked send. Sleep never came. I listened to Raphael's restless breathing in the next room and counted the seconds until dawn. By the time I pulled into Eastbridge's lot, my pulse was steady. At 8:12 a.m., the first ripples hit. Navcom's procurement system flagged the contract for review. All transactions were frozen. Whispers slithered down the hall before I even set my coffee cup on the desk. Executives rushed past, their polished shoes clicking frantic rhythms on the marble floor. By 9:00, the whispers turned to shouting. From my cubicle, I heard doors slamming, voices rising, panic breaking through corporate polish. The contract they'd celebrated less than a week ago was on hold, and nobody seemed to know why. Then came Navcom's formal response, and with it, the second explosion. Clause 81C didn't just cover the $650 million deal. It also applied to the supplemental weapons systems contract valued at $900 million. Together, the exposure wasn't hundreds of millions. It was $6.2 billion. I sipped my coffee slowly, watching executives run past as if the building were on fire. Upstairs, glass rattled as someone pounded the conference table. My inbox pinged again and again with system-wide notices all Eastbridge Navcom accounts suspended pending review. The memo in my drawer had declared me a strategic objective for removal. But now, Clause 81C had declared something else entirely. The woman they had erased was the only one who could keep the company from collapsing under its own arrogance. By mid-morning, the verdict landed like a missile. Navcom's legal division issued a formal notice to Eastbridge either reinstate me as designated liaison immediately, or they would void the contracts and demand repayment $6.2 billion in full. No negotiation, no delay. Within minutes, Eastbridge's stock ticker bled red. I watched the numbers plummet from my cubicle screen while the executive floor above me dissolved into chaos. Phones rang non-stop. Investor calls stacked one after another, and directors scrambled to draft statements that sounded like control instead of collapse. Through the glass walls of the main conference room, I saw Victor Hale lose the polished calm he had worn like armor for years. He slammed his fist against the table, hard enough that the windows rattled, his voice carrying down the hall. How the hell did Clause 81C slip through review? Sweat shone at his temples, his perfect composure cracking. Avery Morgan stood near the projector, pale but trying to hold her ground. It wasn't me, she insisted, her voice wobbling. Camilla wrote it. Why should I be punished for her mistake? Her mistake. The strategy that safeguarded billions in taxpayer money was now a scapegoat for her own ambition. The directors, usually silent shadows, leaned in close to one another, whispering fiercely. Words like resignation, liability, shareholder revolt floated across the glass, carried by panic. I recognized the look in their eyes, the same tight calculation I had seen in officers who knew a mission was lost before it began. For the first time since this ordeal began, I didn't feel erased. The boardroom spun not around Victor or Avery, but around the space I had been forced out of. Every raised voice, every desperate glance pointed back to the absence of the woman they had discarded. I sat quietly at my desk, sipping the last of my coffee, letting the storm rage upstairs. The ultimatum had been delivered, and the board had no shield left. The next move was theirs, but I already knew that whatever choice they made, the balance of power had shifted permanently. The call came just after noon, while the boardroom above me thrashed in panic. The number showed Northern Virginia an area code I knew belonged to half the defense contractors in the country. I answered, steadying my voice. Ms. Duarte, this is Colonel Marcus Reed with Titan Defense. His tone was clipped. No nonsense. The cadence of a man who had spent decades in uniform. We've been following developments at Eastbridge. Navcom's position is clear. They move forward only with you. We'd like to make this simple. I closed the file in front of me, heart pounding as I listened. Senior executive role. Reed continued. Head of our defense acquisitions. Double your current base. Equity stake. Full authority to build your team from the ground up. Hire who you trust. Fire who you don't. Your show to run. Before I could respond, another email arrived. Navcom, blunt as ever. We will not execute or continue under any terms unless Ms. Duarte is reinstated as liaison, non-negotiable. Reed's voice softened. We also understand your circumstances. Titan offers comprehensive medical coverage, your husband's therapies covered in full. We have a tuition program for dependents. Your daughter would qualify. And for your father-in-law. Our Veteran Care Initiative provides facilities that honor service, not just warehouse it. The words settled over me like a tide rising too fast. All the things Eastbridge had stripped away dignity, stability, security suddenly laid before me by the very rival Victor Hale had always dismissed. I looked at the chaos through the glass above me, the board clawing at numbers that refused to move in their favor. For years, they had seen me as replaceable. Yet here was Titan, saying plainly, "We need you." Reed's final words cut through the noise. "You've been treated like a liability. We see an asset. The decision is yours, Ms. Duarte." I placed the receiver down gently, the room suddenly quiet around me. For the first time in weeks, The choice of where my future belonged rested entirely in my hands. The headlines spread faster than fire across dry brush. Titan Defense secures $650 million naval contract. Eastbridge faces 6.2B restitution risk. By dawn the next day, the financial wires carried my name not as a casualty of corporate betrayal, but as the negotiator who had turned the tide. Investors didn't wait for explanations. Eastbridge's stock fell in freefall, and by the second morning, the board forced Victor Hale's resignation. There was no farewell address, no handshake tour, just a sterile memo about pursuing other opportunities. The man who once told me I was invisible slipped away under the weight of his own arrogance. Avery Morgan's downfall came quicker. Her headshot vanished from the company site. Her titles erased like chalk washed from a board. For years, she had built her identity around climbing someone else's ladder, and now there was no rung left to stand on. I thought that would be the end of her, but on my second afternoon at Titan, she appeared in the lobby. No tailored suit this time, no bright lipstick, just a woman stripped of the armor she thought would protect her. "Camilla," she said, voice thin, eyes ringed with exhaustion. "I can still be useful. Let me prove myself at Titan. Please." I studied her, letting silence stretch between us. The memory of her smile as she presented my work to the boardroom flickered through me like a blade. So did the echo of her words' foundation work, as if 20 years of my life had been scaffolding for her ambition. She waited, desperate, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. In her eyes, I saw fear, but also something new, a crack in the arrogance, the first hint of recognition at the cost of betrayal. I didn't answer then. I let her stand in that silence, feeling the weight she had once tried to put on me. For the first time, the decision of her future wasn't in Victor's hands, or the board's, or even Navcom's. It was in mine, and mine alone. Titan's headquarters in Arlington felt nothing like Eastbridge's gleaming glass tower. Instead of sterile chrome and corporate slogans, the walls carried photographs of ships, aircraft, and soldiers in the field, reminders that our work had weight beyond quarterly earnings. When I walked into the division's first all-hands meeting, 30 faces turned toward me. Veterans with gray hair, analysts with sharp eyes, engineers who had spent decades ensuring equipment worked when lives depended on it. I stood at the front and spoke plainly. "No one gets erased here. Experience is our weapon. What you've lived, what you've learned, matters." Heads nodded, the energy in the room steady and solid, like a unit preparing for deployment. For the first time in months, I felt I was standing where I belonged. Later that afternoon, Avery arrived. She looked smaller than I remembered, stripped of the polish she once wore like armor. She handed me her resume with trembling fingers. "I'll take anything," she said. "I just need a chance." I studied her in silence. Erasing her would have been easy, but true justice, I realized, was rarely about destruction. It was about teaching the cost of betrayal. "You'll start as an intern," I said finally. "No pay. You'll work under the same veterans you dismissed as outdated. You'll earn back every ounce of respect you squandered if you can." Her cheeks burned, but she nodded. It wasn't mercy, not entirely. It was a lesson she would carry longer than dismissal. At home, life slowly steadied. Raphael's therapy improved under Titan's medical coverage, his steps stronger, his speech clearer. Isabella received her acceptance letter, and for once, tuition wasn't a question mark. Even my father-in-law moved into a facility where veterans were honored, not forgotten. One evening, I sat on the porch with Raphael, watching the sun sink over Arlington's rooftops. I thought of Victor, gone without ceremony, and Avery, now shadowing the very people she once undermined. The real revenge wasn't toppling an empire. It was building one where dignity was the currency, and even betrayers learned the price of loyalty.